Last week, Troy brought up the idea of differentiating between $1 and $100. In terms of money, that's fairly obvious, but sometimes we have a harder time accurately valuing our time, and how we spend it doesn't accurately reflect our ideals.
Welcome to the Living Life Our Way podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you live intentionally. Our goal is to take back control of our lives by living life on our terms. Join us as we work towards living life our way.
Welcome back. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Troy.
And we've had quite a few questions come into the podcast. And one question that we had come in that's tied in well with what we've been working on a lot lately came from Jack. And he asked, how do you avoid or eliminate procrastination? Are there situations where procrastination is helpful rather than harmful? How can I make time more efficient to maximize value when efficiency doesn't necessarily mean doing something faster? How can better preparation help me enjoy my time more efficiently? So we'll start with the first part of that question. That's obviously a big question, but how do you avoid or eliminate procrastination?
Well, and procrastination is something where we believe there's something of higher value that we put off in order to do something that we perceive as having lesser value. If we thought the reverse, if we thought the thing that we actually were doing had more value, then it isn't procrastination. It's doing what we think is, what we should be doing.
Yeah. And we've seen that TED Talk, and we'll link it in the description, but he talks about the instant gratification monkey and the panic monster. And really what happens is the instant gratification monkey comes, takes the wheel, and then the only thing that can get rid of the instant gratification monkey is the panic monster, which none of us really like to feel. So maybe talk a little bit about that and how we kind of can avoid procrastination.
Well, and so there's a couple things in my mind anyway that are going on there. And I think that the TED Talk, I loved it. He's a great storyteller, and it's really fun to watch. And the point that he has is just that we're the captain of our own ship until this instant gratification monkey jumps on and takes over the wheel and starts spinning. And it feels in life oftentimes like that's the case, like we've just been hijacked. And so before we maybe get into ways that we can handle it, let's deconstruct that idea a little bit. So this notion that we're being hijacked, I don't know if what are your thoughts on just that concept of the monkey jumping in and taking over the wheel?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our day and age, especially with the advent of social media, our attention spans have gotten so much shorter that there's those ADHD popular TikToks right now that are going around, and they're so relatable. And I think it's not because necessarily all of us have ADHD, but a lot of us have those tendencies. And I think it's just that short attention span where we go to clean a dish, and on the way to clean the dish, we see a rag that's laying out on the counter. Then we go to put that away, and then we find some other task that distracts us, and the domino effect just happens. I think that instant gratification, a lot of that comes from just a low attention span.
And I think that's true. I guess the reason why I asked is I've been thinking a little bit more about the idea of procrastination, particularly how we can make movement against it. I think it's important to understand that even though it might happen quickly and we may not really be aware of it, we're still doing sort of a two-part cost-benefit analysis where we're saying, okay, for instance, if I have a homework assignment and I suddenly find myself scrolling on TikTok, there's two activities that I'm choosing between. And in making the decision which one to do, I'm weighing out the costs of doing it and the benefits that I receive. And I guess where I have a little bit of hesitancy in terms of dismissing it as just being a short attention span or ADHD is maybe if we were better about really building out the cost and the benefit differences between those two decisions. And maybe specifically, if we were better about really getting clear on the costs and benefits associated with the task that we think we're supposed to be doing, that we may be able to generate a little bit more intentionality in our choosing. To just say it almost happens to us. I think is unfortunate to some extent because we don't take the responsibility of saying, okay, why did that homework assignment? Why was the value of doing that? Why was the benefit of getting that done? And the costs of doing it now, as well as the costs of postponing it. Why were those not more clear in my mind? And maybe if ahead of time I'd really thought, look, if I don't do it today, I'm going to have to do it tomorrow. I'm going to have to be subject to the panic monster. If I'm a little bit clear on what the costs and the benefits are relative to the costs of hopping on TikTok, which means putting off this assignment, and the benefits, which are negligible, maybe we can be a bit more intentional in the way that we approach the question of procrastination. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I think that there's really two parts to that. That one, or two ways, I guess, to use that information to overcome procrastination. And one is just kind of pattern interruption, where we pull out our phones. The first app we click on is Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And that's almost a subconscious action. So putting something like the 1 Sec app, which we talked about last week, putting that on that slows that down and makes it a decision is really key to overcoming that sense of procrastination. The other side of it could be making those tasks smaller. So rather than saying, I need to go do my entire homework assignment all at once, chunking it a little bit. So I watched a YouTube video from Ali Abdal, and one of the things that he does every day is he uses the 5-minute rule. So he sets a timer for 5 minutes, starts on a task, knowing that he's only going to work on it for 5 minutes. At the end of 5 minutes, you've built up enough traction that you're going to want to continue rather than saying, I'm going to just work on it for 45 minutes.
Sure.
So making it a little less daunting that way.
I like that idea. I mean, the idea that, hey, if I just can make some progress on this larger task, that at least moves me forward in terms of achieving that homework assignment that I need to do. I don't need to necessarily tackle the whole thing all at once. So I like that a lot. Another concept that for me is really helpful, and this comes from Getting Things Done by, I think it's David Allen, but this idea of a 2-minute rule. So Ali Abdal, 5-minute rule, Getting Things Done, 2-minute rule. And that is, if a task emerges that is going to take less than 2 minutes, don't put it off. Do it right now, unless there's a compelling reason why you just can't. If it comes up, just do it now. And the thinking is there. You free your mind as well as get that item accomplished. So you overcome some of that tendency to procrastinate in small bites, much like the 5-minute rule. Take smaller bites to try to move yourself forward at being better at not procrastinating.
Yeah. So hopefully that answers a little bit of how we think you ought to avoid or eliminate procrastination. Obviously, we're not the best at it, but we're certainly working to become better at taking full advantage of our time.
For sure. And I would just highlight, for me, one of the really big key things is, especially on important things that are a little bit bigger, like that big homework assignment or a work project, is really clarifying what its value is, why it is important to me, making sure I'm clear when I'm going to be doing that and blocking that time and really going into those moments intentionally, as opposed to just having it be on this sort of general to-do list and then hoping that I can muster the discipline to do it, at some point along the line. So I think there's some intentionality that really helps out with the procrastination issue.
Yeah,
that we all still suffer from.
Yes, and there's no question. So the second part of the question was, is there situations in which procrastination is helpful rather than harmful?
And we talked a bit about this, and my thought is, by definition, probably not. Procrastination, at least as I'm defining it, is putting off something that we should do now, that we acknowledge that we should do now for something of lesser importance.
Yeah, I actually found the definition of procrastination on Merriam-Webster, and it's to put off intentionally the doing of something that should be done.
Yes. So I think within that definition, probably not. But I do think that the question invites sort of a different concept, which is the advantage of slowing down a little bit at times in terms of our decision making. You know, that we oftentimes have a tendency to be impulsive, and that might lead us to make poor decisions in terms of what we should be doing. You know, and some of the pattern interruption that we talked about is a means of slowing that process down. So for sure, there's very good reason to slow down our decision-making process and be more intentional in that. But I think that's a different concept than procrastination.
Yeah, I think that the difference between procrastination and being thoughtful is a very marked difference that
Right.
anyone can understand. That being more thoughtful, putting those decisions out in front of you, a lot of times those impulsive decisions kind of happen in hindsight. We have road rage and then realize 5 minutes later, oh, we really shouldn't have done that.
Well, or even, you know, for me at the store, suddenly I'm buying something. I'm walking out to the car with, you know, Costco, perfect example. Come for one thing, walk out with a cart full of things. Those impulsive decisions that we make, there's certainly a good reason to interrupt those.
Yeah, and be more intentional and thoughtful about how we're valuing our time and money and just our actions generally. But I do think there is something that goes even deeper to that of kind of the preparation. And Jack asked a little bit about that. How can I make time more efficient to maximize value? Because efficiency doesn't necessarily mean doing something faster. How can better preparation help me enjoy my time more efficiently?
Right. And I think that we talked last time about this notion of velocity. And I think that this idea of personal velocity, that's a big focus of what we're working on, and in some of the tools that we're putting together, is this idea that it doesn't matter how fast you're going. If you're going in the wrong direction, you're not going to get there. Same thing with this kind of planning. The whole idea is looking outside of the moment, before the moment occurs, before that decision-making process is sort of right in front of you. Do some planning, do some reflecting to see what is really important to me. Where are my real high value opportunities here, and make sure that we then utilize our time, our energy, our money in things that produce that value. I think what we oftentimes see, for me, in times where I don't feel efficient, it may be the busiest times I have, but my time, my energy, my attention is spent on things that aren't the really important things. And when I will, ahead of time, take some time to both plan, you know, calendaring and kind of that administrative tasks of planning, but also really reflect to say, okay, here these things are. How do they fit into my, you know, my broader value scheme, what are my ideals, and what's really important to me, my family, at this time? When I do that, my time naturally, just a natural outflow of that planning and reflective process, I am more efficient because I'm clear on what those values are, what is going to generate that value. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It makes a ton of sense. I think just from like an engineering standpoint, efficiency is minimizing the waste of energy through a system. And so really taking these things and saying, how can I minimize the amount of energy, expense, time that I'm putting in to get the desired outcome, is ultimately all that efficiency cares about. And so it can be moving things faster, but it can also be like Abraham Lincoln, if I get 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the saw. Well, sharpening the saw is a much lower energy activity, and it makes the act of cutting down the tree a much lower energy activity.
For the record, I think he was sharpening an axe, but if I hope that he was going to ultimately use the saw if he's sharpening it.
Yes.
But,
well,
whatever.
and mixing analogies, Stephen Covey.
Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah,
you got it.
all sharpening tools to cut things down.
Something's being sharpened, and that's the key.
So yeah, but I think that that's really the point of efficiency is just minimizing waste.
Right, and I think that part of that planning too, kind of going from an engineering or a manufacturing perspective, this notion that there are certain bottlenecks that naturally emerge in our life. So even when we've said this is what is a high value part of my life or element of my life, as we take a step back again, reflect and do some of that planning, we're going to see that there's certain things that consistently impede our movement, impede our efficiency, and whether that is getting hijacked with social media, whether that is the propensity to say yes to everything when there's some low value things that we really need to learn to say no to. Whatever it is, we all have some bottlenecks in our life that once we're clear on, once we've identified, once we've made plans to overcome them, that automatically will also speed up our efficiency, allow for more throughput of those things that are most important.
Yeah, and we see a lot of that in just general productivity advice. Time blocking is a huge one. It's kind of a heavy practice to implement right out of the gate.
For sure. We've had a tough time really making it consistent and effective.
But if you can set aside those times, like getting a homework project done, if you can do that deep work that has become such a buzzword, that really does help maximize your throughput.
Absolutely. And so just using that as an example, that time blocking that we continue to try to get better at, it really did not work well. But we saw that there was a bottleneck that we had in terms of just planning and allocating the appropriate time and mental bandwidth and effort to those really sort of win the day type activities that we really needed to get done. And so as we've gotten better at that time blocking, we've overcome, at least to some extent, what was a bottleneck. So for sure, there's these tools that we can utilize that as we identify, hey, that will solve our problem, that'll reduce the bottleneck, and really make a consistent, intentional effort to implement them, we really can make a lot of amazing progress in terms of being more efficient.
Yeah, and for us, one thing we've really learned about implementing those effective systems is starting small, is trying to pick kind of the minimum viable progress is what Greg McEwen calls it in essentialism, but really taking just the one step, not trying to take 20 steps.
Right. And likewise, in James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about this notion that there is a disproportionate impact of just consistently applying small habits, small actions. If we do that and we build momentum, it's that's powerful stuff. So
yeah. So thanks, Jack, for that question. Hopefully that answered some of what you were wondering about. Obviously,
at least you got our musings about it to the extent that those are helpful at all.
Yeah. So we're gonna finish up with Tuesday's top performers. Mine this week comes from a cartoonist, a TED Talk from Randall Munroe. And he has a website where he lets people ask him questions about what would happen if blank. And so he's gotten a lot of questions. One was, what would happen if a pitcher pitched a baseball at the speed of light? And he got another one that was, what would happen if all of Google's data was stored on punch cards? And he kind of, in his TED Talk, walks through this, but it's something that I thought was really interesting because so much of our problem solving in this day and age is just Google it. And now with ChatGPT, it's just ask ChatGPT. But we're so accustomed to getting these kind of rote answers that are just kind of vanilla almost, where he's using his thinking to think outside the box. There's that common interview question about how many elevators are in New York. And if you can't Google it, how would you go about finding it out? I think that a lot of times thinking through things a little bit deeper than just what's on Google, it provides some interesting insights, and that's really what drives innovation. So that was my top performer of the week.
I love it. I think that so much of what will move us forward and what has moved humanity forward throughout the centuries is asking those subsequent questions, or asking how can we get the same solution from different perspectives. So that's great. So mine this week is maybe a little bit unusual. It is sourdough starter. So a couple of weeks ago, I happened to see some article about sourdough starter and decided I wanted to get some. So I hopped on Etsy and found some sourdough starter. Quick shout out to Mom's San Fran sourdough. And ordered it, and we've just had a ton of fun with it. But there's a few lessons that I've learned from now having my own sourdough starter that I think are really analogous or applicable to life. And the first one is that you have to feed sourdough starter to have it continue to grow. Meaning, if you stop feeding it, it dies. It no longer is productive. Now, gratefully, often you can resuscitate it, so not all is not lost. But it's the same way with our lives. You know, we really are, we need to be fed, and not just food-wise, but we need to be fed intellectually and spiritually and emotionally and socially. And that's really the key to moving forward. And sometimes we get into these patterns or these routines or where there isn't a whole lot of feeding going on. So we need to keep fed to continue to grow. The second one, this sourdough starter has been in this family for over 70 years. They got it from a bakery back in 1950, I believe, 1951. That bakery had been using it since 1850. And it had been in the family since 1810. So this is a sourdough starter that's been around for, 213 years plus or minus. Over that time, it has just continued to feed people, through the generations. So many have been fed by this active, healthy, growing sourdough starter. We're the same way. People are the same way. People that really have a healthy, active, growing life, they really feed other people, and that's a really a cool thing. And the last thing that I thought was interesting is when it arrived in a little bag, and it was just a few flakes. Of this dried stuff. And you kind of thought, how in the world is this going to do anything? So we put it in and we started to feed it. And it was amazing how quickly, within days, this thing was bubbling up and was healthy and living and growing. And we were able to start making bread. And it was amazing. But it made me think that we might feel like in our lives, like we're just those flakes, like we don't have a lot going on. We might feel, discouraged or depressed or anxiety or whatever the case might be. But just like this sourdough starter, this dried one, if we feed ourselves, it'll amaze us how quickly we really can get healthy and growing and be this vibrant, have this vibrant life. So the small stuff makes a difference, and it can move us quickly when we feed ourselves the right stuff.
No question. Well, thanks. That was quite.
That was a little long, but
yeah. But we're so grateful for everyone who's listening to our podcast, coming on this journey with us. The best way you can help us grow is to share this with a friend, someone who you think might like to be fed like Troy's sourdough starter.
Well, and we've had so much fun as we've gotten feedback from people and heard that some of these ideas are really resonating with people. So we love to get your feedback, and thank you so much to those that are sharing with others and sharing with us.
Yeah, so if you have a question that you'd like to hear us discuss, feel free to DM us on social media or send us an email. We'll put both of those contact things in the description. And we'll see you in the next one.